Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on building a smart data ecosystem for transport and mobility. Before we get started, we would love it if you could introduce yourselves and let us know your role and your organization in the chat. And during today's session, if you'd like to ask a question, please add it to the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. And please note that this webinar will be recorded and we'll be sharing the recording of the session afterwards. So if we just go to the next slide. Actually, the one after that, please. So in a moment, I'll be introducing you to our panelists, and we're fortunate enough to be joined today by Hayden Sutherland, who's a digital and technology consultant, fractional CIO and CTO, and principal architect and transport and mobility data specialist. We also have Max Sugarman, who's the chief exec at Intelligent Transport Systems UK, Gayla Boscovich, who's head of Europe at Smart Data and Technology Alliance, and Sam Lee, Senior Innovation Officer in Transport Strategy at Transport for Greater London. Sorry, I'm from London. He's from Transport for Greater Manchester. And my name is Tara Lee, and I'm a Senior Consultant at the Open Data Institute, and I'll be your host for today's session. So before we dive in with our panelists, I thought I'd set the scene with you on this topic area, starting with the basics. What do we mean by smart data? So if we go to the next slide, when we talk about smart data, we're referring to the collective term for technologies and policies that can enable individual consumers and small businesses to securely share data that organizations hold on them with other authorized organizations they trust. These, in turn, will be able to use that data to provide consumers with innovative services. And we've also already seen smart data as a reality in the UK for bank current accounts in the form of open banking. And in the future, we're seeing a lot of opportunities for it to expand into a range of other consumer sectors, including energy, retail, and of course, transport, as well as other financial services such as savings, investments, mortgages, insurance. And new ways of mobilizing data will create opportunities to empower consumers, increase competition, and sustainably grow our economy. And it's estimated that new commercial opportunities created by personal data mobility could increase GDP by £28 billion per year. And smart data will be key in unlocking this. Now, you might be asking yourselves, Tara just said she's from the Open Data Institute. Why are they interested in smart data? Well, our focus is on making data work for everyone. And when you look at the requirements for smart data schemes, according to the CMA on this slide, if you think, frameworks to govern data sharing, common and open data standards, participation and representation across the data ecosystem, interoperability, these are all areas we work in and care deeply about. If we go to the next slide. So the ODI has been a leader in smart data since the early days of open banking, where we convened the Open Banking Working Group, which eventually evolved into the Open Banking Implementation Entity, now Open Banking Limited. In convening that working group, we helped set the standards that are still used in open banking to this day and have set a template for other sectors. We took this approach into early conversations in the energy, telecoms, and wider finance sectors and published the Smart Data Innovation Guidebook, which called for the launch of a challenge prize to prove the value of smart data. So in 2024, we worked with partners and the Department for Business and Trade to run a Smart Data Discovery Prize to ascertain the appetite for a full challenge prize around smart data innovation. This proved that the appetite and most importantly, the ideas were there. And in 2025, we ran a full Smart Data Challenge Prize, awarding £600,000 across 10 teams to prototype smart data solutions across a number of sectors. One of those teams was Open Transport, and I'm sure Hayden would love to tell you more about this. And we also had the good fortune of having Max as a mentor on the challenge and Gayla as a judge. So we're in very good company today. There's a lot going on around smart data these days, and we've been supporting the Smart Data Council to help guide government strategy in this area. And this has resulted in the publication of the Smart Data Strategy 2035, which was published in March by the Department for Business and Trade. So we just go to the next slide. So I've included links here for anyone who wants to read about this in more detail, and these will be shared after the webinar today. Key insights from that strategy include how exploring how the Data Use and Access Act and early schemes like open banking, Fuel Finder have been and continue to lay the groundwork before rapid expansion to more than 5 sectors and growing investment between 2027 and 2030, accumulating in 20 plus schemes and a mature world leading smart data ecosystem by 2035. It talks on how smart data is set to transform industries, including banking, energy, transport, telecoms, retail, agri-food, and has the potential to generate up to 9.6 billion in annual GDP by 2043 through increased competition, innovation, and consumer empowerment. And it emphasizes the need to build a globally connected smart data economy, with the UK shaping cross-sector governance, strengthening international partnerships, and positioning itself as a global leader in smart data, driving trade, investment, and long-term economic growth. So for us today, I'd like us to really keep in mind that building an ecosystem for smart data, including smart transport, requires multiple organizations to work together. And throughout this webinar, we'll be thinking about ways to help encourage that collaboration. Now, I think I've spoken to you long enough about smart data landscape, so I think it's time we spoke with our panelists. So I'll invite them to join the webinar. I think if we stop presenting, hopefully we can see each other's faces a little bit bigger on the screen. Might take a second to take effect. While we're doing that, can I ask each of the panelists in turn just to introduce themselves? And I'll start in the order that you appear on my screen. So Max, can I go to you first, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tara. I'm Max Sugarman. I'm Chief Executive of Intelligent Transport Systems UK, ITS UK. We're the Membership Association for Transport Technology. So we represent 200 organisations from both public and private sector looking at transport and tech. We often get asked, what is transport tech? And the answer is often quite broad. So we have organisations doing smart ticketing and journey planning, mobility as a service systems, all the way through to enforcement technology, traffic signals, and everything in between, and lots of different applications of data and AI. And in this context, we've been very interested in where the government is thinking about smart data in transport and what it would mean for the sector in terms of how it would change how different parts of the industry interact.
Thanks, Max. Sam?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sam Lee. I'm the Senior Innovation Officer at Transport for Greater Manchester. Transport for Greater Manchester is one of the trailblazing regions that are looking at reform of public transport. Some of you may have seen the B Network, which is kind of taking back control and ownership of bus network and other services into a more localized context and delivering value for citizens. As part of the innovation team, we're very much the pathfinder to the organization to look at what's coming next, and smart data is one of those key components that have a lot of enabling capabilities, not just from AI or simulations perspective, but for us to better understand customer needs and push information and kind of insight to customers to have a better journey experience, both living in the city, but even visiting the city region. So I look forward to a bit of a discussion today around how we're looking into the future for smart data.
Thanks, Sam. Gayla?
Hi, Gela Vushkovich. I run the Smart Data and Technology Alliance. We were actually asked by government back in 2016 to form as the Financial Data and Technology Association. This was back in the early days of open banking. And I've spent the last 10 years looking at how to build a thriving open banking ecosystem that looks at data sharing under secure, consented, permissioned frameworks that allow consumers to maximize the economic value of their money. And so a lot of what I've been doing the last 10 years has been focused on setting the foundation for what we're looking at in smart data. I am also involved in smart energy, and I have a regulatory economic background both in energy, telecommunications, and actually financial services as well. So I'm looking at broadly what this data sharing framework looks like from a consumer protection perspective, as well as a thriving uh, smaller firm participation that are driving innovation and driving different types of product development and services. And so while I am not in transportation officially, a lot of the lessons that have been learned from open banking and from the early start of open energy, smart energy, can be extrapolated and applied to transport as well.
Thanks, Gayla. And finally, Hayden.
Crikey, how do I follow that? Hi, everybody. I'm Hayden. As well as sort of consulting around the transport industry and doing lots of digital stuff. For the last 6 or 7 years, I founded, along with a bunch of plucky individuals, founded the Open Transport Initiative. It was set up with the aim of creating the open banking for transport in a time before the term smart data was even coined and came into use. Since then, we've been working and advising government, local authorities, companies on how best to do interoperable customer data sharing. And we've even published via open specification APIs for doing just that. And we're pushing for adoption. So there's obviously last year, as Tara has mentioned, we can talk about it for ages, but I won't. We were a finalist in the Smart Data Challenge, and in fact, we were runners up in that. And we created the very first sort of dashboard, which is a demonstrator of the capabilities of smart data, showing how it's possible using the API specifications that we've recreated to share smart data in transport systems and test systems from multiple different modes, from vehicles through to public transport, and share that data and create a data sandbox we've even done now to show it's possible to share data across multiple modes using smart data. So the next step is to work with continually with organizations like SAM at TFGM and all over the place to evolve out that concept that we built, that proof of concept, that dashboard, to use it for multiple different use cases that can be used for smart data across the transport ecosystem. So thanks, Tara. Good to see you.
Thanks, and welcome to all of our participants who've joined us today. I'm looking through the chat, and I can see we've got a real range of sectors involved, as well as a nice geographical mix. I see Switzerland, I see Germany, I see Finland. So really pleased to have such a diverse audience with us today. And as a reminder, as we're going through today, if you've got any questions for any of our panelists or just discussion points that you'd like to raise, please do put those in the chat. I know there is a separate Q&A button in Zoom as well. It is just easier to put it in the chat so we can see all the questions together as well. Let's start off questions. So, to our panelists, what problems in transport and mobility is smart data best placed to solve, and where's the greatest value? Hayden, I introduced you last, so maybe you'd like to kick us off.
Well, it's probably going ahead of the work that the Department for Business and Trade are currently doing right now, where they have, the last couple of months ago, interviewed and had a lot of people in workshops to try and identify the actual prime use cases for data sharing across the sector. But it's not giving too much away to say the overall use case. There are several key use cases you can have for sharing key pieces of data that are in a customer's account and that they can share across the transport sector. Once you build up a uniform way of sharing journey information across the same modes, You show product information across multiple modes, and even the concessions and the discounts across multiple modes. You can start to fulfill all sorts of use cases. One of the key ones is the most fundamental, which is to consolidate that into a certain place and make sure that everybody can see it in a uniform way. But once you've got that data comparable and interoperable across multiple different modes and different accounts and different sources, you can do all sorts of things with it. So one of the key use cases we identified was consolidation, but then to show all journey history in one place. And then you can start to show things such as CO2 usage, how many miles, how many CO2 sort of kilograms you're burning for all the way across your journeys and everything. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be something as simple as a way of doing all your expenses. If I'm going to go to an event in London, I'm going to get a taxi from my home to the airport. I'm going to get a flight down to London. I'm going to get TfL via the DLR and get in. I'm going to have to go to three different accounts just to do my expenses just for that one trip. Why isn't there a service, an interoperable way of sharing all that data, my product data, and having it at my fingertips? It's part of it's actually a right of the individual under GDPR, and nobody actually in our sector is doing it. So those are basic use cases. But the law of unintended consequences is heaven knows what else there is that people can come up with and innovate and find uses for doing it.
Yeah. I mean, within the Smart Data Challenge, when we asked people for smart data ideas, the ideas that we came up with were not necessarily the things we were thinking about when we launched that challenge. So there are a lot of innovative ideas out there if we can help to encourage and foster those. Max, I'll come to you. Same question to you. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly with Hayden that it almost is how long's a piece of string? The more ideas and use cases, the better. I suppose from my perspective, there's a lot of going on at the moment in terms of funding for digitalization of transport, coming from central government, but also from combined authorities. So there's quite a lot going on where I feel like a smart data approach could be beneficial and help get these things across the line. So to name just a few, I mean, the big one that we've spent a long time looking at is the new proposals by government to charge electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids for per mile, which is the first ever proposed road pricing system in the UK. And what they're proposing to do at the moment is you do that for via odometer reading, but you can see a huge amount of application in that in terms of smart data, in terms of data sharing with trusted parties. So that that is something that we've been advocating a smarter approach to. But across multiple modes, there's things like ticketing and concession information. There's things around connected vehicle services, which and other parts of the Department for Transport's working on. The key thing is to tie these things together because a lot of this work is going on within different departments and separately, and actually understanding whether a smart data scheme could be applicable there, I think is really interesting. And that's without actually going out to the private sector, who I'm sure have loads of ideas of what they could be doing as well. And as Hayden mentioned, expenses is a great one where, it would be fantastic to be able to develop an industry that is able to support that and have an application. So it's quite exciting in terms of it's almost sort of imagine what as much as you can in terms of what the applications are. But it's a great place to be in.
Yeah, no, that's thinking about the interoperability that's required there and how many different sectors we need to be considering with these ideas, but the potential that comes with that. And yeah, you're right, Max. The private sector it's not a dirty word when we're talking about the innovation things. There are definitely opportunities that they are probably best placed to bring in here as well. Sam, I'll come to you next. Manchester, not London. Sorry for my slip up earlier. Whoever said Londoners are London centric, I don't know. Same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things has been covered by Hayden and Max. I think the two key things I want to touch on is expand a bit more is that cross-sectorial consideration. Max talked about kind of energy consideration. As a public sector authority, we're driving our electrification agenda to achieve net zero by 2038. Increasingly, all our vehicles, our charging infrastructure, even in the future, our taxi will require power. How do we get that data from, through smart data to feed into investment going forward for generation, for storage? And the more interesting bit, and this is where the public private sector could play a role, what are the future financial models for smarter tariffs and other things that could really help accelerate adoption of these services, drive to net zero, while at the same time providing a lower cost basis for these services to operate so that everybody benefits as part of that proposition. And I think a lot of things we've been thinking about as a region is the fact that we can't necessarily build our way out of the problem anymore. We need to use data and insight in a more effective way to operate and manage the networks and systems that we have already, and make sure that the solution is very customer centric. So when we think about smart data, we probably think this has been talked about before, right? 3 or 4 years ago, it's just in a different name. What's changed? But I think the fundamental thing around how people access information and how much more willing they are to share what they have in terms of behaviors and insights and getting that tailored response through some chatbot or other solution have fundamentally flipped this around and opened the market for more solution to be created as part of it to help us manage the network by influencing travel behavior rather than just changing timings and signals. So it's a really exciting time actually of how big data, AI, and smart data all coming together now going forward, delivering real solution for city regions.
I think you've possibly opened up a can of worms there in terms of thinking about different things we should be considering there. Gayla, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think to pick up on what Sam has said, it's about influencing or optimizing behavior rather than reimagining what we have to build or what we have to produce. And we're starting to see that in smart energy, for example. It's a matter of automating switching tariffs for the better tariff depending on your actual consumption. And if you're willing to share how much energy you use during peak times or during different types of weather and solar loads, that you have an opportunity to automate that switching to a better tariff. And we're seeing that especially for small businesses when they don't necessarily need to be stuck with a tariff for a year or 18 months, the same in the retail space. But it's also when you start to blend that cross-sectoral information, your financial data, in with how you behave, how you consume, how you move, that you are optimizing that actual economic value of the penny that you spend to do the thing that you want to do. And that has a number of implications from your entertainment and getting down to London or up to Leeds for an event. It's, planning your vacations. At the same time, it's also saying, we want to make sure that our home is going to be heated for the winter and it's properly heated. And maybe I need to think about how I consume or how I travel in order to make sure that I can cover my energy expenses. It all sort of starts to blend together. But if we're more comfortable starting to share information about what we do, and we actually are more interested in having an appropriate risk associated with our behavior. This is especially salient in financial services, that we get better prices for the products that we consume. We get better interest rates. We get better terms on a mortgage. We get better terms for our current account and our savings. And this is widely impactful across the entire spectrum of how we live, from the cost of living crisis that is pretty global at this point, to energy consumption, which is definitely a global crisis. But it also is in those day-to-day moments of feeling very assured that you can manage to do what you need to do in your life in a way that doesn't have a negative impact on you, but also not just negative, has an additional positive impact of how you are able to execute the things that you need to do. And a lot of that is based on our behavior. And so if we can find a way to benefit off of the things that we do, that we actually do, in a way that, again, maximizes the economic value of our money, but also maximizes the efficiency of our time, from doing expense reports to getting our cars charged to ensuring that there's enough energy load in the house to do the overnight charge for the car, and to make sure that the refrigerator is still running or that the heat pump is still going, that we have that assurity. And we can do that with information and intelligence. We don't need additional infrastructure. We don't need necessarily additional providers. We need innovative insights off the back of the things that we actually do, and data drives that. That's what smart data really is.
And actually, there's a couple of questions already in the chat from Tom Campbell, which I'll come to later on, because there's a few things we want to talk about today. But I think, Gayle, you've touched on a couple of points in Tom's questions there, so I might come back to you a little bit later on those as well. We've talked about the number of sectors that could be involved in smart data schemes related to transport. How can interoperability be achieved across fragmented transport systems and different modes? Sam, maybe I'll come to you for that one first. Got a few different transport modes and networks in Manchester.
Yeah, I think that's always been a challenge in terms of working with private sector stakeholders. I think for us, we're quite unique as we're similar to London now, devolving some of the control and getting more control of different services, how we provide them, the data and the insights associated with it. But I think a lot of that kind of interoperability is creating a common standard for how data needs to be captured and shared between different stakeholders. To a customer, they don't really care what apps they're using. They just want to be able to access the optimal service for the optimal mode and the purpose of their travel as part of it. But we're trying to balance that with strategic objectives for the region as well, for us primarily net zero. I think some of the key things are going to be around new infrastructure, as Max touched on, around digital twins that different regions and organizations are looking at, and how we use that to, I guess, inform operational decisions as well as strategic investment going forward. For us, with that devolving of public transport and kind of other services, how do we get the public to share data to tell us why are they traveling, at what time, for what purpose, and for that tailor insight to help us then give them proper responses that are trusted and reliable and actually safe, considering other factors such as safety, where some of the traditional data does not kind of hold. So we're still in the early stages of kind of working out what new data sets we can open up, but a lot of it is about building trust, building on standards on how data can be shared, and making sure the public is part of the design process as we implement new solutions and new services, such as things like autonomous vehicles in the future or micromobility services in the region.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hayden, why don't I come to you next on that one?
Obviously, the way to get interoperability is consensus standardization, but that's one way of doing it. And for the last 5 years, we have published an open standard API specification for doing this. But it's unfortunately not a field of dreams. If you build it, they don't just come. So you have to encourage adoption as well. So it is, yes, publishing a standard, publishing a way of saying, yes, if it doesn't, and people go, oh, it doesn't exactly meet our needs. Okay, tell us why it doesn't, and we will evolve the standard and develop it so that it does. But obviously, after that, it needs adoption, and we can can be the next barrier, because until things like there are requirements baked into proposals that say you'll actually use a common standard for sharing data like this, then it's all good for us to publish a standard and say it's all there, you can have it. But unless there's some sort of that's the carrot, unless there's some form of stick, unfortunately, we're not going to get everybody adopting it in a swift way. So yeah, you can get interoperability. There are standards for doing it already, but it's not just a case of making it available.
I can definitely go off on a very long tangent about standards and the importance of ecosystems and community around them, but I will resist on that front. Max, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, at risk of making a really obvious point, transport is a really diverse, kind of completely spread out, very different subsectors from one another, all mixed together, a real mix of private and public, of startups, SMEs. If you look at the taxi and private hire sector, you've got self-employed people running one cab, all the way through to the rail sector, which has, Network Rail running the infrastructure and, for the time being, operators running on top of it. It's completely, it's a real jumble of different organizations, different priorities, a very safety focused culture, and dare I say, sometimes a bit hesitant when it comes to doing things. So you're not working in a kind of a perfect environment where things are quite easy to join up. And I certainly think that has been the challenge when it's come to stuff that has been tried to be done in the past. And for those who may not be in transport, mobility is a service where we've been trying to, for a long time, create sort of one app that allows you to travel, book and journey plan on one platform. Has been kind of the dream of having this kind of one app to rule them all. And it has suffered for many years because of a range of different commercial issues in terms of how that's worked between different parties, and also the role of government versus the private sector. I should add, there's lots of good cases of mass apps and innovations, but I think the industry, 10 years ago, there was a feeling it would be at a certain point by now where it's not. So, the point I suppose I'm making is this is a quite complex environment, but as Hayden said, with interoperability and standards, there's an opportunity there to get everyone behind what Open Transport are doing. And as Sam also highlighted, as more combined authorities take control of their transport networks, the number of organisations is coming together, and that's really where I think there's quite a lot of exciting things to be done in terms of the bus networks now being in control of combined authorities, the rail network being completely in the control of Great British Railways. That's where there's opportunities for those new organisations to come together and go, actually, we have all the levers now. Can we do something with the data that we have?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting how many different sectors I've heard this. Oh yeah, we can have one app to rule them all. Doesn't work. But without interoperability, you can come up with lots of different apps that actually give people the functionality that they want, right? Gayla, you're not a transport expert, but you are our open banking expert, and wondering if there are lessons you can share around interoperability from that can be brought into the transport sector.
Part of it is convincing private sector to coalesce around a single standard. Because if you're going to participate in the ecosystem, you have data that you need to be able to share. It's not your data, you're a custodian of that for the consumer. And at the same time, you're going to be consuming data. So getting into a position where you can share, which is a requirement or GDPR, and for the UK, it is definitely a requirement or a requirement under the Data Usage and Access Act, and you're going to be consuming it. So getting on to let's use a transport thing, a highway, and a highway of being able to share that data has a similar system with similar rules, similar data syntax, similar formatting, similar payload information, that you're able to consume that. You only build one API. It's a minimal investment to be able to comply to the law, but also take advantage of intelligence and insights that you don't have that actually would benefit your end consumer, because it would provide you a different kind of context for product creation or product roadmap development, as well as innovative new services. So it's making sure that you understand that each of the actors in the ecosystem understands the benefit of coalescing around a single standard. It's tantamount to having a plug-in socket. And if you're an appliance manufacturer, or even you're manufacturing hair dryers or coffee pots or electric tea kettles, whatever it happens to be, you don't necessarily want to limit your ability to access consumers or to have consumer trust that your product will work if you don't have a standardized plug that actually fits into a standardized socket, and that you're ensured that whenever that plug meets that socket, the energy flows and your appliance, your little thing, works. And that's tantamount to being outside of an ecosystem where you don't actually coalesce around a standard. You're not only increasing the overall cost of doing your business, you're increasing the overall cost of delivering a service to your end customer, and you're costing more. So interoperable standards reduce the overall cost of ownership of that service or product that you're delivering. It means it's also a lower cost to operate, and it's a lower barrier for consumers to cross in order to access your service. So there's an economic, and as an economist, of course, I'm going to go to that particular argument. But it's really important to drive that home because if you're going to be in service, if you're a business, or even if you are a public service, you need to make money. And the only way to do that is to get consumers to adopt your proposition and to use it and to trust you. And you don't have that if you don't have a reliable service. And in the digital space, where things are being driven by intelligence rather than a physical product, having those insights and having the ability to acquire additional information about your consumer that they're willing to share, or to be able to share it with another service provider that you can't actually do. You don't do that thing that the consumer wants, but they're relying upon you to ensure that they have access to that other thing. You don't have their trust and you don't have their commerce, and therefore you don't have a sustainable business. So the business of doing business means that you're going to have to get around coalescing around a single standard in order to make sure that you can do that at a price point that is actually attainable. The other thing about interoperability is that it makes it so much easier to understand where something goes wrong. If you have a single standard and everyone is looking at a network that works well, if something goes hiccupy, then you have an opportunity to diagnose where the problem happens. So, from a reliability and a redundancy in terms of systems approach, having a single standard makes it easier to diagnose where the problem is within the network. So again, you as a business or you as a service provider can actually point to, well, there's a faulty API or someone didn't quite engineer that right. And therefore, we know where the problem is. And it reduces, again, the overall burden of having to maintain your systems. It literally is a shared cost across everyone. And it makes it so much easier to diagnose where problems are, to ensure that you have consumer trust because things just work. And it also means that you're not fragmented across what you're doing. You don't have to build multiple APIs in order to comply. You don't have to build multiple times in order to do something. Instead, you have also the collective brain power of improving that API standard or improving what actually is shared and understanding where you're going to need to change some of the requirements in terms of the fields. And it's a technical term in terms of how for a lot of people, maybe they're not quite familiar. But when you're sending a package of information, there are fields of information that you're supposed to be able to actually fill out and that the receiving party will be able to recognize. And when you start to develop additional use cases or additional products and services, collectively you start to recognize where additional data points become important. And so the development of that standard also has the collective intelligence of the group. And so you're getting a much more robust, let's like open source standards, a much more robust, much more secure, and much more safe approach to sharing that information, but also what information should be shared. So there are additional benefits that come with moving towards an interoperable standard.
Yeah, I'm very excited talking about standards, and I'm trying desperately not to go off on a tangent about them, and you're not helping my case there, Kate. I mean, so my next question was going to be, what does a well-functioning smart data ecosystem look like in practice? Gayla, you've talked now about standards, about interoperability, about having good use cases to sort of test and make those standards robust. Is there anything else that you would consider in terms of what makes a well-functioning smart data ecosystem, what that looks like in practice?
A couple of things are critical. One is a trust framework, and a trust framework is an ensured closed space or a way of validating that those who are requesting and those who are sharing the information have permission. They're certified, they're regulated, whatever the standard may be, but they have permission and they're trusted. And therefore, you know that when you're talking to the different party or you're making that request across the network, that it's valid and it can be trusted, it can be honored. The other is a consent mechanism that you need to ensure that the consumers have granted permission for that intelligence to be shared. And that's a critical component. Consent drives absolutely everything. If it's not permissioned, it's not valid, and it breaches compliance, which is something that we should all be concerned about. The other part is it needs to be commercially sustainable. And therefore, every actor in the value chain needs to make money off of this, including the public sector. There needs to be some revenue that drives the ability to provide this in a reliable way. So commercial sustainability is quite critical for an ecosystem to thrive. You have to have incentive to invest in those businesses that are providing. You need to attract outside investment, but you also need to ensure that revenue flows, that there's turnover and the businesses stay in business and that service continues to be there. So commercial sustainability is important. So for me, it's the essential components really are, does consent exist? Is it commercially sustainable? Does the trust framework ensure that the actors that are exchanging that intelligence have permission to do so? And are the technical standards interoperable? Those are the four major components of a healthy ecosystem in my mind.
Thank you. Sam, I'll come to you with the same question. What does a well-functioning smart data ecosystem look like to you?
I don't think I've seen one in the UK yet, apart from some of the smart banking work. But I think it's all the points I touched on, trust being a key part of it. And I think that's where public sector play a big role. I think we still have a lot of the kind of trust of the public that we're delivering best value for them, whereas sometimes when data are going to private sectors and other actors, that there is a bit of a gap associated with that. I think the other two kind of key areas for me is when we think about infrastructure now is no longer just like housing or transport. It's that cross-sectoral piece between transport, energy, digital connectivity to allow all this data to flow through. So without those kind of components, it doesn't really work anymore when we're trying to get near real-time data to inform the customer to provide a better service, or to inform us to change things on our system to improve the network and how it operates. I think the last bit actually, and we've been kind of talking about this in different guises, but there is definitely a skill piece for public sector. Like within public sector itself, we can't necessarily compete for while earning data scientists or data experts as part of it. So we need to be smarter around that in terms of how we work with universities or other partners to create pathways of getting these people into public sector to support us and help us think about data differently and that smarter data ecosystem, but still working with public sector to develop the solutions, private sector, sorry, to develop the solution as well.
No, that's really interesting. I'm seeing some really interesting, not just questions, but some comments there about how things work differently in Europe as well. So that's some interesting food for thought there. Hayden, same question to you.
Well, obviously, Gail and Sam gave some great thoughts, and I'm going to build on top of those. On top of that trust framework, and we'll perhaps get into should it be a transport-specific trust framework or should it be a multi-sector trust framework? And am I really going to go to the open banking to approve a transport account user? There's other areas, though, that I think we need to have that overall ecosystem working. First one is a little bit of enforcement, I'm afraid. The ICO for several years have had all the rights we needed under GDPR to do all sorts of things, and they have been unenforced. The right to data portability is the right for individuals to obtain and reuse their personal data, to move, copy, and transfer personal data easily from one IT environment to another in a secure way without affecting its usability. That is smart data, but it's unenforced. It's never been enforced. Everybody's worried about the right to data rectification and can I get my data erased from a marketing company? ICO have never ever enforced, as far as I'm aware, the right of data portability. As a consequence, in the transport sector, it is woefully ignored and deliberately ignored. There is no company, no organization yet that properly does data portability. Yes, sure, in some systems you can say, oh, we'll give you an export of text data and you can take it on with you, the same you can do with your banking details. but you can't put it back into that, even as that same system, let alone another system. There is no portability, so we need that enforced. The second one is we need some best practice examples shone a light on and exemplified and say, this is how to do it. This is how you should do it. This is how you can do it. We're full in our transport sector of saying, oh, it's too difficult. I can't do it. It's a Thursday. It's purple. There are so many reasons for people to say no. We need to say, hang on a second, they're doing it over there. Copy that, use that, adopt that. It's not that difficult. There's API specs available. There's somebody who's done an example of that. Why don't you why don't you just do it? And the last one really is, why don't we start writing some functional and non-functional requirements in our specifications for our public transport systems to actually have what we need, which is data portability, or those rights under GDPR, data portability. I'd love to see the next major public sector transport tender come out with just one requirement for smart data and data portability into it. Then I will rest easy and get off my high horse about it. Thanks, Tara.
Thanks, Hayden. Making friends everywhere.
I'm not going to make friends because, as you know, I once got told off, I think it was last year's Open Banking Expo, for saying that the data turkeys don't vote for Christmas. I've had people who've deliberately told me they don't want us to be a success because they want to have their customer data be locked away so they can use it. Oh, we are getting resistance all over the place. We don't make friends, unfortunately, by doing what's right in the right way for the public interest, unfortunately.
Hey,
Well,
can I pick up on that, which is really interesting. It took 10 years for banking in the UK to have a zeitgeist change.
Yeah.
Originally, the incumbents were entirely reticent about doing this. And a few years ago, something switched, and they realized that they can actually take advantage of this and that they benefit if they are actively participating in the data sharing themselves. And it takes a minute for some private sector, at least in the private sector, it takes a minute for that conversion to happen. And we're seeing that across financial services in general, that it had to be a mandate in order to drag people kicking and screaming to do the thing. Once they did the thing, they saw the benefit of doing the thing. Sometimes it does take a mandate, and it depends on the market. It depends on the supervision and enforcement. And that's something that is dependent entirely upon the market itself and to a certain extent the cultural relativity of that market. So if we've got European viewers today and participants, absolutely true. It's very different in Europe. And I've been involved in that as well as the European Commission consultations on, moving open finance forward and what that looks like, the enforcement of standards and the multiplicity of standards across Europe and the European landscape. There are some that have come out tops, but it's still fragmented. And yet we're seeing across the globe that there is this push towards open banking at an incredible scale because they see the benefits. And we're no longer seeing the hesitancy for those incumbents that said, this is our data, this is something that we need to protect, understanding that actually it's not, it's the consumer's data. And they're in a better position as a provider if they actually participate fully. So sometimes it does take a little bit of time, and sometimes it does take a mandate and an enforcement mechanism to get the initial thing started versus a voluntary approach to industry leading. And I think one of the interesting things about transport, it's a hybrid approach. It's a hybrid. You've got public service providers and you've got private service providers. And that makes a different type of tension in terms of how to drag this along or how to accelerate it. And so while I've had most experience in the private sector aspect, I think the interesting thing is eventually, and unfortunately that's the caveat, eventually participants get it and then they want to do it and they don't want to be held back by regulators. They want to move it forward. So it's just maybe a matter of time for a collective tipping point to be hit in transport where you see more adoption and acceleration. But a little prodding, a little stick sometimes is absolutely necessary.
while you've been speaking, the audience has been cheering you on in the chat. I can see energy sector pushback on smart meters, fearing it result in user reducing usage. Today, the sector realized its power multiplier virtue to help inform CapEx.
Yeah.
Had another someone from Finland who's talked about how the EU approach is different and has helpfully put in a link if anyone would like to look at the impact analysis of Finnish traffic data ecosystems. My
Jana. So that's Jana. He's from as far as Finland goes, he is the person about data sharing in the Nordics. He is an expert there.
Well, thank you for joining us, Yana, and sharing your insights in the chat with us today. Mindful of the time, so I'm going to ask you all one last question myself, and then I will go to the questions in the chat. So, Max, I didn't come to you on the last question, so I'm going to ask you this one first. What role should government play versus industry in designing these schemes?
That's a really good question. Sorry, I had to run out. It's always great timing, isn't it? And if someone timidly knocks at your door. Um, yeah, what role should government and private sector play? Well, the big thing that I think we could benefit from the government is a clear direction as to what sector, what use case, what they want to do with this. And I think that's where often where things don't get off the ground is because there's a bit of uncertainty from the private sector. But private sector always wants confidence. We all know this. We want confidence that about where something is going, what government policy is. And I think the government can set the direction for what it wants to do. So I thought that the smart data strategy that came out was a really good start. There's the commitment in there to investigate where things are going in transport and what they could do in transport. And I think your colleague Joe shared the link to a workshop we're holding on the 9th of June, which I said I'll shamelessly plug, where DBT and DFT are going to work with attendees to try and flesh out where a scheme would be. But I think, what I would hope if we were to do this webinar in a year's time, in 18 months, that we would have a kind of an aim from government of where they see smart data in transport of what they want to do. And then it's for the private sector to rightfully compete for how they best do that and bring the innovation and expertise to this. But really, I think now it's kind of on the sights of where we see this going. And given as what I said, transport is a mix of public and private, it will likely need a real mix of combined authorities, operators, wherever that scheme is set up.
And just mindful that we don't just have a UK-based audience here. So for anyone interested in that workshop, it's DBT is the UK government's Department for Business and Trade, and DFT is the Department for Transport as well. Same question to you, Sam. Interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Max has set me up very nicely. I think the role for Devolved region out like ourselves is to be a bit more bold and actually to be that example as Hayden kind of touched on. And we've already done a number of innovation projects kind of in this space to test it out. But I think is that key aspect of public sector need to set out the ambitions, implement it, and share the failings. I think as public sector, we are very risk averse a lot of times, and we're always open to talk about when things doesn't work to make sure public investment is done in the right way and people avoid the pitfalls. I think on the private sector side of things, please challenge us more around what we should be doing more, what data you want us to be more open about, what I think there's a whole piece around even just data discoverability. Public sector sits on the treasure trove of data, yet a lot of times it's very hard to get access to leverage value from. How do we blend that with kind of some of the smart data sets to generate even more value and new use cases going forward? So yeah, be bold, share failings, and collaborate more, I would say.
Thanks, Sam. Gaia?
Ooh. Government is in a position to clear some of the obstacles. So from a legal perspective or a legal framework, that's important. If there's a policy that actually conflicts with the objective of setting up a scheme, government's in a perfect position to do that. So public sector, in the sense of transportation, I'd say the Department for Transportation as a regulator and any associated regulatory bodies are in a position to, again, clear the way for the policy to actually allow the information to flow. Private sector is there for innovation. Private sector is there to challenge and to press and to take risk within the construct of a safe environment. So public sector Government is also in a position to set up sandboxes and testing grounds and lab-like environments where you can do something that could be risky, but you can learn from it and it's documented, it's well understood. The entire point is to see what happens. It's not to go live. So I think government's in a great position to foster additional challenges, like the Challenge Prize. I think it's a fantastic program. I think doing something along those lines on a consistent, regular basis that says, let's look at all of these potential use cases and let's find ways to encourage private investment to pilot that. You can sort of separate the risk of well, the commercial aspect of it, but also, creating an environment that encourages crazy ideas and ambitious things and pushing back against government. At the same time, you're not necessarily sinking a bunch of money into something that's going to fail. So I think government, again, in a great place to smooth policy, to ensure that statutory instruments are being put in place for regulators to actually move forward to both create carrot and stick environments for service providers and industry participants, but also creating a place where you can actually play around and test things out and finding out how to do things in a sandbox environment.
Thank you, Gayla. Hayden, if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to the audience questions because we've only got 5 minutes left. We're having a really interesting discussion here.
Right, that's fine.
If you would put the questions in the chat. So Tom asked, who do you see providing customer accounts? Assuming multiple transport operators can interact with a single customer account, would that account be provided by one of many, private account providers, or by a transport operator themselves, e.g. an Oyster account, which can also be used for Manchester's B network?
I can answer this really quickly. There's hundreds of customer accounts out there in the transport sector, 26 different train operating companies, 300 bus companies, several hundred taxi companies, micromobility, mobility as a service, and that doesn't include all the things like the regional services like the B network and the account and TFWM and all those accounts. There's hundreds of accounts that can be joined up already. Now, should there be a new service where you can see everything in one place? Well, if one operator doesn't provide it, then like when open banking came, the dashboard started to come up and people started to see their spend and given nudge tools and started to lead to other services, as Gela will tell you. So there's those. So in short, the first person that really does this is going to get the advantage. So if somebody like a local authority says, okay, we'll have smart data, so you can't just share a smart data, but you can pull everything in from all around the region or whatever it is, that's really going to encourage it. And there are those accounts already. There's even accounts, for example, for your car tax to online. So, and we can talk about the use case there as well. So yes, I'd say there's a mix, like Gela said, between the private sector and the public sector of people having all these accounts already, but there's a case for saying these dashboard applications and the use case specific applications could add considerable value and benefit and ultimately value, money and value.
Thanks, Hayden. Tom put a couple of questions in, but I want to try and get to a few different people's questions here. So Andy said, what are the main differences between organizations that are genuinely smart data driven from those that are utilizing off the peg AI tools? What's coming on that one?
Just before everybody else dives in, Sam was probably going to talk about AI for loads of time. Go on, Sam. You go first, and I'll chip in after.
A quick answer, Sam.
No, it'll be a very quick answer. I think the key part of it is people using AI tools are just trying to get insight that they currently can't access. A lot of it is related to data skills and capabilities. That's why people are pivoting to kind of natural language solutions to get that insight. I think organizations that actually access the raw data and start looking at what's between the lines in terms of the data insight and start creating synergy with other data sets ends up creating wider values. So linking, personal data and travel behavior data to future of energy markets. That's a phenomenal piece of work, but AI isn't going to solve that in the near term because it requires a lot more local context. It requires insight from people's minds. So I think that's, to me, the key difference around how local knowledge and insight feeds into outcome and strategic investment rather than just insight from AI solutions.
Thanks, Sam. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more question here from Zach. Understanding transport users and becoming more consumer-centric are oft stated but unrealized goals. With public transport authorities and DfT the only mode-agnostic actors, why isn't there more investment in the discovery process? What's the blocker? Max, you came off mute there.
Yeah, I'll contribute. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there is more acknowledgement around the need for support for integrated transport, and obviously there's the Better Connected strategy that's come out with some key kind of recommendations around integrating transport. I think some of it is the fact that it's more complex in some ways than looking at things in a modal way. And I also think that we're a sector that I think suffers from not traditionally having been set up for technology. And what I mean by that is that look at how local authorities function, for example, transport authorities. They're still capital expenditure heavy. They struggle with operational expenditure. They struggle to buy software as a service products that are more common in other industries. That has meant things move, I think, quite a bit more slowly than they have done or previously could have done. That is not to say that the transport sector isn't innovative, but I think maybe that goes to explain some of the challenges around why we haven't seen sort of this massive growth in data services.
Thanks, Max. We're at time, so to wrap things up, I'd like to ask each of our panelists in turn, in one sentence, what does good look like in 1 to 2 years' time? Sam, I'll start with you.
Travel behavior for people to be easily shared in a trusted manner so that can be leveraged by public and private sector.
Thanks, Sam. Max?
A focused smart data scheme that is being set up with government sort of setting out the direction, private sector coming in and helping support it, and hopefully lots of very happy consumers and transport users who are getting very excited and backing it.
Thanks, Max. Gayla?
A couple of use cases that actually have incredibly wide support that coalesce around a single API standard, and that API standard is going live and in production where actual live data exchange happens. Things take a lot of time. So it's not as ambitious as the others, but it's a realistic 12-month goal.
Thanks, Gayla. And Hayden?
A shout out to Bulk Transport, who in the Data Action Plan actually said that they were going to be pushing forward with smart data, at least understanding the use cases and going forward with it. One of the most obvious use cases, though, is this paper mile that Rachel Reeves last year said she was going to do and charge car tax and vehicle excise duty. There's no better use case than smart data for that. Otherwise, people are going to buy a car 2 days before their MOT due and get charged 700 quid for the previous user drive and get around for more than a month. This is personal data. It's the most obvious transport use case, and it's waiting there to be taken, and we should be doing it.
Thanks, Hayden. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today for a really interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you everyone who joined to listen and ask questions and share their own insights and links in the chat today. We really appreciate your participation. The recording from today and the slides will be shared later on by my colleague Joe at the ODI. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day, wherever you're from. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.